Hello, welcome to this cake decorating tutorial from Katy Sue Designs. I'm going to be showing you step by step how to decorate this safari animals cake here. So there's three main animal molds that I've used to make the safari animals here, and they are the elephant family mold, the lion family mold, and also the giraffe mother and baby mold. So I'm going to be showing you how to use your fondant in the molds to get a perfect decoration come out of your molds, and then also how to use edible dust and edible paints on your decorations to give them some depth and dimension and a realistic feeling to bring them to life. You can also see that I've used some other Katy Sue molds on this cake. So I'll be running through how to use those also and showing you how you can attach your decorations to your cake and arrange them.
Okay then, to start with, we're going to be using the elephant family mould, and I'm going to show you first how to do the mum elephant. And what you need to do when you use Katy Sue mould is you just need to put some Trex inside the mould. So this is Trex, your white vegetable fat. Just put a little bit on your finger. You don't need a great deal, just enough just to create a smearing inside the mould to prevent the fondant from sticking. You can always dust your mould with some corn flour if you don't have any white vegetable fat. They both work exactly the same, but today I'm going to be using the white vegetable fat. So once you're happy that you've just smeared the fat all around the mould, then I'm just going to take some grey coloured fondant now. And I'm just going to be putting all of one colour inside this mould. And then later, when it's dry, we can paint on some details to really bring out the details on the elephant. So I'm just going to give that a little bit of a roll and basically just pop that straight into the centre of the mould, and just work it in with your fingers. Now, it's quite a hot day here today, so I've got some corn flour on hand, and I'm going to use that just to dust my fingers with the corn flour just to stop the fondant from sticking. That's a great tip to know, because you can get in a rather big mess otherwise with fondant sticking to your fingers if you've got hot hands. So you can see I just worked the fondant up to the edge here, and then I pulled off the excess. Just smooth that down into the mould. I'm going to bring some down here into the legs. It's quite a chunky mould to work with, so I don't really tend to use the Dresden tool. I mean, you can use it on this bit here if you want to, if you're finding that a little bit fiddly, but I just managed to get that in there with my fingers with no problem. Keep working it around, and I'm going to finish off by putting it into the back legs there. And then you just kind of tear off the excess. I'm going to use my Dresden tool here just for his little tail. I've put a bit too much here in the bum, so just scrape that off. I find it easier sometimes to use a palette knife. It just cuts it off flush with the mould. So that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for the fondant to be flush with the top of the mould edge. So press firmly down onto your fondant to make sure that the fondant is picking up all the details in the mould. Don't leave any bits of fondant overhanging the edge here, because that will be a little bit messy when you've demoulded your elephant. You don't want a rough edge, so keep that nice and smooth with the edge of the mould at the top here. Now it's time to demould it. So first off, what I would advise is if you just gently pull the edges of the mould, so you can see that it comes off very easily around the large areas. Just be a little bit careful around the tail there, and also just in between the legs. You might find it a little bit more tricky. and also around the trunk area. So I'm just going to, I don't want to rip the fondant at all. You can always add some Tylo powder to your fondant. If you find it's not firm enough, that will firm it up and make it so much easier to use in your moulds. Also, that helps them to dry hard as well. Right, so I think that's fine. So I'm going to start releasing it from this end and let the trunk kind of follow through rather than try and get the trunk out first. I think it would be easier to do it from this end, which is nice and chunky and there's not really any problem bits to get out. So turn your mould over and flex your mould. As you can see, the backs come out very easily. There, perfect. And there's our elephant. Oh, it's so cute, isn't it? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm just going to set that aside to dry. You can add that straight to your cake if you want it to bend around your cake. But I'm going to leave it to dry a little bit because I don't know what position I want them on my cake. And if they're a bit drier, they can stand up in the position that I want them to. So I'll put that aside to dry. And then you can make the other elephants just in the same way as I've made the mum elephant. So next is the baby elephant. So let's have a go with him. This baby elephant is just so adorable, don't you think? Let's leave him to dry. There's our dad elephant. I'm going to pop him over with the rest of his family to dry off. So now we can help to bring the elephant to life by using some dust colours on him. It really gives the decoration some depth and make it look more realistic. So the way that you do this is you need some edible colour dusts. So they want to be the matte versions, not the shimmery, sparkly metallic versions you can buy. So these are just matte colours, and I've chosen some colours that I think would be suitable for an elephant. So I've got some browns, greys, whites, blacks, and a sort of a cappuccino colour, I think that is. And you can also mix the colours together also. So if you mix your white and your black together, you do get a grey. And what you want is kind of like a buff kind of brush like this. So as opposed to your normal paint brushes, which are just like that, you want something with a bit more of a dense end so that you can really get the colour onto the elephant into a nice sort of smooth consistency, if you like. So we just use these dry. We brush them on dry. You can use them as a paint if you want to mix them with some rejuvenator fluid, but for the purpose today, I'm just going to use them dry. So I'm just going to kind of make it up as I go along, really. See what looks best. So I've made it's kind of a browny grey colour, because I think that's kind of like an elephant colour. And kind of just bang your brush off a bit so it's not too loaded up with colour, because you can always add more on. The thing is, once you've put it on, you can't really take it off. So I'm just going to start on his back here and see how it goes. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, just that little bit of colour has kind of added some dimension to the elephant. I have let the elephant dry off quite a lot, so I can handle it quite well without fear of it breaking or the brush distorting the fondant. So it's quite dry, so I've got no worries about damaging my decoration here. So just do as you see fit, really. Adding sort of the darker shade to the areas where you think that would help benefit the most, help bring out that realisticness of the elephant. So under his tummy here. And inside the ears, we'll make them a little bit darker too. And then you can kind of go in with some lighter colours if you want to try and sort of add more dimension. See how we get on. I've added a bit of white here. And it's great because the dusts really begin to pick out those small details in the mould. Look like the wrinkly skin here on the elephant. And then for the tusk, I do want to have a little bit more, I want that to be more of an ivory colour. So let's just go over that with some white to bring that out. And then for the eye, I think I will use a little bit of paint, and this is one of my favourite paints to use for the eyes. It's a rainbow dust. It is a metallic black, but I mean, I find it's not really that metallic. So I'm just going to use this little pointy stick. That's all it is a little pointy stick. Quite often I use the end of a paintbrush for this also. So something like this, I find it's good for just adding kind of a dot of paint. I find it more controlled than using the actual brushes, the brush end of the paintbrush. So let's find his eye, and then we can paint that detail on there. There. So that's our mum elephant. And you can see the difference that the dusts really do bring that realistic element to your decorations. So I just need to now dust the baby elephant and the dad elephant, and they'll be ready to add to the cake. Next up, we've got the giraffe mould, and just look at all the detail in this mould. It's just absolutely amazing. So I can't wait to show you the results when that come out. So I'm going to use this kind of creamy beigey colour for the giraffe, and remember that we will be painting these decorations when they've dried off a bit, so we can add all the colour and all the details, but this is just the base colour of the giraffe, and I've already put some vegetable fat into there so that the fondant isn't going to stick. So place a blob of fondant into the middle of the mould, and then I'm just going to push that up through the giraffe's neck and into his head. I'm using some corn flour on my fingers to stop the fondant from sticking. And it's quite easy to do, quite simple. When you find you've got too much, I just tear it off like that. You can use your Dresden tool again. So I'm going to just use that on the horn there of the giraffe. And go back down the neck and into the giraffe's body. And then I'm just going to push this over the front legs and then start to work that into the mould and find out where the legs separate. It's just there like that. You really want to make sure on the legs that the fondant is filled up flush with the mould. If you haven't put enough fondant in, it's too shallow, you will cause a bit of a delicate area which could break. So you don't want that. So just make sure that that's filled up completely, and then that will be strong enough when you come to demould it and then add it onto your cake. And just work the fondant round. A bit much there, take that way. Through to the back legs. I'm going to take my palette knife and just see if I can just cut a bit of that away. Cut a bit away from his back because there's a bit too much there. There's a bit of a hump. It wasn't flush with the mould there. And I'm going to take a bit of my fondant and just use that just to fill in some of the legs, because I think the palette knife took a bit too much away. There's not quite enough in there to fill up the mould. So you can just add that onto there like that, and that just it just works perfectly fine. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see any of these joins because it's the back of the mould, the back of the decoration. So that's going to be stuck to your cake this side, so that doesn't matter at all. This mould has got such a lot of detail, so really make sure that you're pressing the fondant down so that it's picking up all that pattern, like that mosaic pattern that giraffes have. Then you can start to flex the mould a little bit just to get that initial sort of release before you turn it over. And for this mould, I would start from the head end and then release the legs last. It's always the best way. If you try to release the legs first, it's going to be a lot more trickier. So release the big bulk of the decoration first, and then the delicate bits, such as legs or tails, they'll just follow through. So turn your mould over, flex your mould, wiggle the head out, and out he pops. There we go, just pop his legs back in place. Right, now I've got to carefully scoop this up because I want to leave that in another area of the kitchen to dry off. So I could do with 2 palette knives really. I might just pick the head up like this. There we go. That's time for the baby giraffe. Again, I've already put some white vegetable fat into the mould so the fondant isn't going to stick. This is just done in the same way, it's just a smaller scale mould. Now we need to add some colours to this giraffe to bring it to life. I've used dust on the elephant and the lions, but with this one I'm going to actually paint the details on because it's going to be very hard to dust each individual one of these kind of mosaic-y shapes here. So what I'm going to use is this Pro Gel colours from Rainbow Dust. It's just a gel colouring. You do get other gel colouring makes. They're all similar really. It's just quite an intense colour. So to get the kind of shade that I want for the giraffe, I'm going to take some of the brown and also some of the orange. And I'm going to mix that together to get the right kind of shade for the giraffe. So also what you need when you do this is you want some Rejuvenator Spirit. It's just a food grade ethanol. It's a really high percentage of alcohol, works much better than like your lemon essence or vodka. It just evaporates more quickly, so your decoration will dry better and not be a big sticky mess for a long time. So I'm going to pour a little bit of that onto a plate and I'm going to try and mix up the correct colour. Let's see how this goes. So take some of the brown and some of the orange. I think we need a fair amount of orange actually for this. I don't want it too watery really, and I don't want it too thick. I find that probably just a small amount of the Rejuvenator Spirit would probably work best, just to get it down to a paintable consistency. Let's test that out on a random piece of fondant before I go fully in. I think that actually looks quite a good shade. I'm finding that I've kept quite a lot of the orange, but just added in a small amount of the brown. So find yourself a suitable brush. I want quite a fine paintbrush for this. And then you just begin painting. And now we're going to do the lion family mould, and this is quite a good mould because it's so sort of quick to put together, this one really. There's no sort of fiddly bits, but it's, again, the Katy Sue quality is that it's so detailed. You'll just see how easy this is to do. So I've already put some vegetable fat in this mould to stop the fondant from sticking. Just need to work a bit of this fondant because it's been sitting out for a little while. Okay, I'll just pop that. It's a bit too much. Pop that into the mould, this sort of caramelly colour, which I think would be good for a lion. His head is quite deep in places, so you need to make sure that you've really press down into there so that the fondant is going into the nose area. The legs are all in one on this one, so the legs aren't fiddly or delicate at all. So we haven't got to worry about using our Dresden tool if you don't want to. Then there, that's basically filled up. I just need to do a bit of tidying around the edges. Perhaps I'll use my Dresden tool just here for the mane of the lion. Do need to cut some off though. Put a bit too much in his back. So cut that off a bit more flush with the top of the mould. I like to rub around the edges of the fondant on the edge of the mould just to make sure there's no rough bits. It's all flush and level. Right, pick our mould up. Give it a little bit of a flex. See it releasing from the edges. That'll make it much easier when it comes to popping the decoration out. Pop his back half out first and then through to the head. So there's the lion. Again, I'm going to leave him to dry while I do the rest of the lion family. Right, so let's add some more dimension to this lion decoration and really help to bring him to life. So again, I'm going to be using the dust colours. I find it's quite forgiving. When you add it to your decorations, you can just kind of buff it in, but you can also paint them. If you paint them, the paint I find is a little bit less forgiving. But I didn't really have a sort of suitable orangey lion colour, so I've had to improvise. So I found that if I mix this yellow here with this sort of browny colour, I do get a colour that I think I can work with on this lion. So let's just begin adding that and let's see what happens. So here we go. Working the dust over the decoration. It helps to pick out the fur details. As you can see, the lion's got such great fur details on this mould. So let's start to bring that out with the dust. You can kind of see the difference already between the female there and the male here. With a tiny bit of golden yellow here on his back, on the side of him, to bring out a little bit more dimension with the different colours. And I think if I use this brown here, and make sure you haven't got too much brown on your brush because I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'm going to go around the mane, around the edges of the mane with this brown. And you can, if you find that you haven't put enough colour on, you can always add more on. But remember, it's best to start lightly and then you can just add more colour and build it up. Whereas if you put, if you go in aggressively with your colour, you can't take it away. So just lightly build up the shade that you require. I find this quite therapeutic, really, doing this. It's not taxing. It's just a nice thing to do. I'm going to put some of the brown around the edges of the legs to give some more shading. And under his tummy there. Also, lions have quite a dark tail. I think I might need to use a smaller brush just for this. And then finally, I'm going to use some black around the eye area. So I've got my black paint here. I'm just going to dot a bit of that on. To pick out the eyes. There, and again you can see how the dusts have worked so nicely just to bring that to life. So then you just need to do the same to your female lion and the little baby lions, and that's ready to add to the cake. One thing I do really love around a cake is some polka dots, and I find this mould really useful for creating some polka dots that you can add to your cake. It's the measuring mould from Katy Sue, and this is a task that you will just want to sit down with when you've got a cup of tea, perhaps a podcast on in the background, because we do need to make quite a few of these polka dots because we've got a 3-tier cake that I want to cover in polka dots. But it's just quite easy to do. It's quite quick. You can see they just pop out. I find it best to use corn flour in this mold. You could just dust it in. That just makes the spheres just pop out really easily and quickly, as you can see. So we just need to add them with some edible glue, just a small amount of glue on the back of the dot, and then add it in position. I have let these dots dry off a little bit, just so that when I begin to add them to the cake, when I push them down just to attach them to the cake, I'm not pushing them out of shape. I've also marked the cake where I do want the polka dots, because I do want them in some sort of symmetrical pattern. So I've just used a small pin just to mark in position where I want to add them. This mould that I've got here is the rope and pearl border mould, and I'm going to use this to add a border around the bottom of each tier of the cake, because I think it's just a really nice way to finish each tier. Sometimes it looks a little bit rough at the bottom, so this is just a really nice way to provide that finishing touch to the bottom of your cakes. So what you need to do is you need to dust your mould with some corn flour. Tap out the excess that you have there. And if you just roll a sausage-shaped piece of fondant, and then if you just start at one end of the mould, so I'm starting at the bottom here, and just begin to push the fondant into the mould with your fingers like this. So that you're pushing the fondant up and keeping the fondant flush with your mould. And just carry on doing that until you get to the end. Just finish that off. Make sure there's no bits of fondant overhanging the top edge of the mould like that. provide a nice clean edge to your border. I'm just going to cut that end off with my palette knife and turn your mould over, and if you just flex the mould and kind of open it out slightly, the fondant just pops right out there. I really love this mould. I think it just looks so beautiful, and that's going to look great around the bottom tiers of our cake. So let's add that onto the cake now. Taking some of your edible glue, just brush that onto the back of the border mould. Remember that less is more. You don't want the glue to be splurging all out from around the mold, around the decoration when you add it to your cake. So you really don't need to add too much, and then just place that around your cake. Just gently touch it in with your fingers just to make sure it's adhered. And then you can take your other bits and go around and finish it off on all of the tiers. Now it's time to attach our animals to the cake. So because I've put this border mould around the bottom, I can't get the animals to sit flush against the cake in order to stick them on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stick a blob of fondant onto the back, and then put some glue on that piece, and that will allow me to stick it to the cake nicely without worrying that there's not a lot of contact between the animal and the cake. So I'm just going to have to get my hand around the back here and push the elephant on so he sticks nicely. And then I can attach the rest of the animals in the same way. So pop some glue on the back of the elephant again, on top of the back of the lady elephant. And then I think I can fit the baby elephant just underneath here. Yeah, it fits just lovely in there. It looks quite good actually, because they're all kind of popping out in a more 3D way. Now time to add the giraffes, and for the giraffes I need to do the same thing. I need to stick a little blob of fondant just onto the back of the giraffe, just to allow that just to stand off the cake a little bit because of the border and the polka dots are in the way. So let's just find a nice place for him to stand. And just about there. This looks good. Very carefully attach to the giraffe. Do the same with the baby giraffe. Just be quite careful with the baby because he's a bit more delicate because he's obviously smaller, so let's very carefully do that. Hold him in place for just a second. And lastly, the daddy lion. Putting that fondant on the back there. I'm going to put him around about there. Repeat with the mummy lion. Just being careful when you handle these that you don't touch the sides of your cake, because we have dusted the animals, so you may get a little bit of transfer of the dust onto your fingers, so just be mindful of that when you're handling your cake. Now I've got to find a place for the babies. I'm going to place him there. And I'll put the other one underneath here. So next we're going to be making some flowers and leaves to add to the cake for some floral interest. And what I'm going to be using is the Hellebore Christmas Rose mould. So I know it's a Christmas mould, but actually it's a really great mould because it's just got some really lovely flowers in there. It's got 3 different sizes and the leaves are nice and large. And I just think it's just the sort of ideal mould that this cake needs. So the way in which you use it is you take some corn flour and you just dust your mould with the corn flour and then just tap out the excess corn flour in your mould. And first off, I'm going to be showing you how to make one of the flowers. So I have added some Tylo powder to this fondant just because I just want the decorations to dry firmly, to dry solid and hard and keep their shapes, because I'm going to be letting them dry off first. I'm not going to be adding them to the cake straight away. So put your fondant into your mould and use your fingers or your Dresden tool to push the fondant into all the edges of the mould. I've put a little bit too much and I'm going to cut that away with the palette knife. Cut a little bit too much there, so I'm just going to add a little bit more on top. You can also use floral paste for this. That would work really well, as it would mean that your flowers would dry really firm to touch, but this will be fine if you haven't got floral paste. I'm just using fondant, so I'm just going to show you the way to use it. It just works just as well for this purpose that we're doing. Okay, so once you've got all your fondant flush with your mould, let's give that a little rub, and then we can release the flower from the mould. So just turn your mould over, flex the mould, and out comes the flower. So I do want this just to dry in a more sort of cup shape. So I've made a kind of makeshift flower former. You can buy special flower formers, but I've just taken a piece of ordinary kitchen tin foil and I've pressed the tin foil into like a little measuring spoon just to make some dips in the tin foil. And into these little cups, I'm going to just press the flower in, and then I can leave that to dry, and that will keep that shape. So it gives a beautiful cupped flower shape instead of remaining flat. So obviously I'll be making all the different sizes of flowers, but I'll just show you one of the leaves too. So I'll do a large leaf here. So the mould's already been dusted with corn flour, so I'm just popping the fondant, which I've added Tylo powder to. I'm just popping that fondant into the leaf. Pressing it in, making sure that I'm pressing firmly down onto the fondant to pick up all the detail as usual. And then turn the leaf out like so. And with these leaves, I might just fold the bottom up a little bit like that. And then I'm just going to leave that to dry against the side of something like this, just so it gives, say, another interesting shape, and that'll dry in position like that. And then again, we can add that to the cake. You can bend your leaves however you fancy, really, to give them a bit more realism. And then obviously I need to make quite a few more of these. I'll let them dry off. And then the next part is just to show you how I'm just going to dust the centre of the flower, just to bring it to life a bit more. So let's get on with making a few more of these. Once you've let your flowers and leaves just dry off for a bit, you can see that this flower has kept a lovely cupped shape here. So I'm just going to add some dust to these flowers just to bring them, give them a little bit more dimension. So I've got some pink here, some pink powder colour dust. And I'm just going to brush that in the centre of the flower. It just looks so good already, doesn't it? And then just a little bit around the edges, on the edge of the petals too. Really, you can have any green for adding some colour onto your onto your leaves. Any green will bring it to life. So I've got this moss green here, and I'm just going to blend some out from the centre of the leaf and around the edges, just to give it that little bit more extra special finishing touch, really, I guess. You don't have to spend too long on each leaf. And then when you've done those, they'll be ready to add on to your cake. Take a look at your cake and decide where best you think looks good to put your leaves. So I'm going to stick one here. And of course, just totally wing this. It's going to look good no matter how you arrange them. My leaves and flowers do still have a little bit of give in them. They haven't completely dried solid, so there is a bit of wiggle room to manoeuvre them into position.